I could see soldiers on the lorries firing.
June the 3rd, 1989. I was in the Chinese capital, Beijing, reporting on the long-running crisis in Tiananmen Square.
The troops have been firing indiscriminately, but still, there are thousands of people on the streets who will not move back. After hours of shooting and facing a line of troops, the crowd is still here. They're shouting, "Stop the killing and down with the government."
The world watched in horror as the Chinese army fired on demonstrators, demanding greater political freedom from the country's communist leadership.
I turned round and the man on my right wasn't there. He was on the ground, dead. It's the only story I've ever felt it was important to say, yes, I was there, and we'd seen it in all its terribleness. A country sending in its soldiers to kill its own people in the middle of the capital, indiscriminately. We got a slice of history.
When I filed those reports from Tiananmen Square, I'd already been a BBC producer and reporter for almost 20 years.
An enormous list of people.
I joined the national TV news team in 1976.
A railway station.
And covered all kinds of stories wherever they happened.
4 hours after the raid, the Libyans still have no idea how many people were injured here.
I had been in extraordinary situations for a good decade and a half.
The protesters were mainly students, complaining of corruption in the state bureaucracy, censorship of the press, and of economic and social reform proceeding much too slowly. By mid-May, several students had begun a hunger strike, and then a crisis for the party leaders. The Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, arriving in Peking for a long-planned summit meeting.
When Gorbachev went to China, with an enormous presence of international media, the Chinese Communist Party leadership had to tell Gorbachev that when he walked through Tiananmen Square, he might have to deal with the demonstrations. That was the enormous loss of faith for the Communist Party.
I went straight out to walk through these crowds of young people. The atmosphere was not like a student demonstration with everybody standing and shouting, and serious groups, lots of bespectacled students sitting around debating.
But then a new element stoked the fire.
There was a little change in the crowds. For the first time, there were more ordinary Beijing citizens coming into the square. The faithful, loyal worker who normally didn't question anything about the status quo. That's when real concern began to go through the top echelon. In came, on the night of June the 2nd, a huge number of military. Nobody envisaged what was going to happen in the next 24 hours.
Shortly before midnight on Saturday, June the 3rd, the army moved in from the city's outskirts.
We got a call from one of the people who'd been helping us. He said, "I can hear shooting. There is a lot of shooting, and there are troops, and they are heading for the center." I said, "Right, out we go."
There were no smartphones then, and no available satellite links to get live pictures out. All I could do was report on a landline phone.
Thousands of Chinese troops have opened fire on demonstrators who've been occupying the center of Peking for weeks. Kate Adie reports from the bloody streets of Peking.
Fires are burning in many of the roads. Army trucks set alight. And there is gunfire from over a wide area. In the main road...
Ultimately, the crucial evidence of what happened was our video footage, first broadcast the following day.
Kate Adie witnessed the worst of the clashes and starts this report as the confrontation unfolded.
The noise of gunfire rose from all over the center of Peking. It was unremitting. Furious people stared in disbelief at the glow in the sky, listening to the sound of shots. Hundreds of people cheered as buses were set alight and army trucks caught fire too. And then, as troop lorries were seen moving down the road, there was gunfire from those lorries.
I could see soldiers on the lorries firing. I turned round and the man on my right wasn't there. He was on the ground. He was dead. I turned to my left and the other man had a massive, great hole in him. I turned to the cameraman and said, "We've probably gone past the point where it's too dangerous to stay." And he said, "Yeah, but we're staying, aren't we?" I said, "Yes."
We picked up a woman with a bullet in the head and took her into a scene of near mayhem. Casualties were arriving every few seconds. On bikes, rickshaws, park benches, carried in, all with gunshot wounds.
We turned up at what turned out to be the children's hospital. And I got out to a scene out of a bad movie. A floor running with blood. The whole place.
In 20 minutes, 40 seriously injured were brought for emergency surgery. 2 were already dead. The operating theatre was overflowing, many of the staff in tears.
If someone died, they just slung the body on the floor and got someone else onto the table.
The troops have been firing indiscriminately, but still, there are thousands of people on the streets who will not move back.
I remember clearly feeling that we had to bear witness to all this.
I'd been conscious we'd seen no other Western TV crews. I knew that the Chinese would deny what was happening. And that's why we stayed out.
Young people were singing the Internationale to a background of gunfire. After hours of shooting and facing a line of troops, the crowd is still here. They're shouting, "Stop the killing and down with the government." A huge volley of shots just as I left the front line caused panic. 2 others were killed yards away. 2 more people lay wounded on the ground near me. In the streets, many came up to us, shaking with anger and disbelief and fear. "Tell the world," they said to us.
Tell the world. Tell the world. And I wanted to, and I knew I had to. I felt driven more than any other occasion to want to tell people exactly what happened.
Kate Adie, BBC News, Peking.
We had the footage, but the danger wasn't over. As we took cover in a ditch, I agreed with my cameraman that I'd get the precious tape back to our base.
I said, "This is it," because it's just got so desperate now. It wasn't just dangerous, it was desperate. So I grabbed the cassette and said, "I'm heading back to where we call the office in the nearby hotel." And I started running hard. And there was another volley of shots. And a man cannoned into me from here. And I had the cassette, and I fell straight over him because he went down. And when I got up, I had blood all over there, and I realized that he was shot, and the bullet had gone past there on me. There was a scrape of skin open. And as I lay on the ground, there were others on the ground round me, and they'd been hit. And I saw something weird. Little red sparks, not far from me. Little sort of like red ticks, instantaneously. That was bullets hitting the tarmac. I got up. I just ran. And I ran and I ran and I ran. I absolutely tore through these crowds, being bashed by people, bumping into, avoiding people, and going over dead people. And I finally made it to the big high wall of the hotel and found the gates, huge great gates, locked. So I went up the wall like a lizard. I just went straight up it. And it took all the skin off here, etc. Heaved myself over it and dropped the other side. I was possessed of a sense of determination. And I ran across in front of the hotel, up the steps, and I could see there were figures there. And they were either police or soldiers. And all I remembered doing was I attacked all three of them. I kicked one, I whacked another with my elbow and my arm, and I then finally hit one with the cassette. I was absolutely out of my wits. Thank God there was a door open down the corridor. This apparition turned up, you know, covered in blood, grit from the ground, filthy, and not very coherent initially.
I'd reached the safety of our BBC base. But we still had to get the pictures, the evidence of the massacre out of the country.
An entire government, I felt, and I'm right, was going to deny it. And we'd seen it in all its terribleness. A country sending in its soldiers to kill its own people in the middle of the capital, indiscriminately.
We made 5 copies of the precious tape and arranged to smuggle it out of the country.
We gave 5 people cassettes, and they were told to go to the airport and get the first plane anywhere. Chinese security were all over like a rush. Somebody headed for Kuala Lumpur, somebody headed for Singapore, and somebody went to Tokyo. That's the cassette that got out.
How could soldiers of a disciplined army slaughter hundreds of their own unarmed fellow citizens? Why did the protesters remain in the face of such savagery?
How could they just stand there? Why were people cycling along, people going to see? It was a complete and utter incomprehension that their own army could be killing them. Every school child is taught the army loves the people. They chant it. The army loves the people. They could not get their heads round the fact that the army was shooting at them.
Well, that was not something that really was so inconceivable. There were incidents, particularly during the Cultural Revolution, when the army used excessive force to suppress demonstrators. And considering also that China is a country with huge number of dialects, even if the local garrisons in Beijing could not shoot on Beijing citizens, the party could easily have replaced them by sending in units from faraway parts who would not speak Mandarin and would therefore simply follow orders.
The orders must have included shooting those who continued to protest. Because as daylight came to Peking on the 4th of June, the killing resumed.
During the day, soldiers guarding the entrance to Tiananmen Square fired several times into the crowd. Kate Adie sent us this further report on the day's fighting.
The daylight hours have seen more violence. For at 10:23 this morning, there was a sudden and deadly volley from the troops. The crowd ran, and bodies were left lying in the road. The injured were raced away on any available transport. The burnt-out vehicles and signs of battle were not confined to this area. Crossroads around this vast city have wrecked vehicles, broken glass, pools of blood. Half an hour later, again with no reason or warning, the troops opened fire again. Between 30 and 40 people were killed by the two volleys. Kate Adie, BBC News, Peking.
The army was told to take it as an attempted revolution. So to the army it was logical. They shot people.
Next day, we witnessed an act of defiance which came to symbolize the whole uprising.
As Kate Adie reports from Peking, there are still students prepared to defy the authorities and continue their protests, whatever the risks.
Just after midday, the tanks rolled out of the square. A lone young man stood in front of the first one. The tank faltered, came to a stop. Onto the tank, trying to talk to the men inside. He blocked their way again. The tanks must have avoided him in the next few moments as they moved towards the crossroads. Kate Adie, BBC News, Peking.
No one seems sure what became of the tank man, as he came to be known. Some rumors said he'd been imprisoned or even executed. But his bravery and vulnerability seemed to me a perfect symbol of the unarmed victims of the massacre. Within days, the Peking Spring withered. The authorities were rounding up large numbers of people. Then they turned their attention to the reporters.
The whole of the foreign press was being harassed. We were being threatened. One of my colleagues had a gun held to his head.
Historians put the death toll in Beijing at least 2,000. But in China as a whole, who knows how many were killed? Tiananmen Square was shocking and has an enduring effect. For me, one that lingers, in that I'm currently banned from entering China.
18 months ago, I was planning a visit, and my visa was refused. It seems extraordinary so many years later.
The Communist Party has very long memories, and they start to see foreign journalists who criticize China in sensitive areas as being, in a sense, anti-China. And I think that's probably why you were given this badge of honor.